So we've looked at the way in which cosmic time has been recorded by the megalithic monuments as in its main features. And to do that they started with using inches to count days, which is very similar to some of the early attempts on bones apparently to count things by using roughly equal steps. But with this counting, by using constant length, the inches were like our rulers that we use today, and it enabled you to do a count for something like 3 solar years and or compare that. So if we have a look at this, we've got, if we had the number of inch counts for 3 solar years, we can look at the lunar year underneath and we can vary the angle to create what's called a right angled triangle. So we put a right angle down here, and a number here will correspond to another different number of inches on what people call the hypotenuse. So they're doing a form of trigonometry actually, but they didn't need to know that. And by doing this they were studying the invariant ratios between different periods of time. And I'd like to move away from the solar year and move to the time it takes for the moon to go in its orbit around the Earth, and the time it takes for the moon to become fully illuminated again, which we call the lunar month. And that ratio on Earth is very close to 27/25. So I have numbers down here. If we take 25 and put 27 above it, we get the invariant ratio, which is 22.3 degrees as we would measure it. And along the top here, the longer line would be the number of days in a lunar month, and the shorter line at the base would be the number of days in a lunar orbit. But another property of these triangles is that they also tell us about frequency, because the number of orbits in a solar year is about 13 1/3, and that's then the longer line becomes 13 1/3 at the same time, and the shorter line is in proportion of 12 1/3. So by looking at this, they are actually starting to enter the world of what we call musical tones, because a musical interval is between two notes where if you divided the lower note by the bigger note, you would end up with a fraction of increase. And this was well developed in the ancient world in the theory of music, but Gurdjieff makes the unusual but momentary claim that before this working with musical tone, the original ancient schools, probably in the megalithic, had understood something about the musical tones found in the sky. And when we look at Gurdjieff's presentation of the law of 7 in Beelzebub's Tales, he has changed it somewhat. And here's my presentation of that octave that he presents as the changed octave for the world. Up at the top would be the starting note and the end note, which we would call Do, and then we have Re, Mi, and at this point Gurdjieff points out that there is a stoppage or a blockage in this semitone where something has to come in from outside. He calls it the third stopinder, because he's moved, instead of talking about notes, he moves to talking about these intervals, which are these ratios. And so when we look at this ratio here, he says that God lengthened it by a certain amount, and what we can say about that if you lengthen this semitone, then the final semitone in this particular scale will have to be reduced by the same amount. And that would then correspond to what he calls the intentionally actualized Manelin in the new universe conceived in this way. So we have something has to come in from outside, and then here something completes itself without any help from outside. But in the middle, all the notes that used to be there have been moved on by this same amount, which happens to be 81 over 80, if we could show it on this device. Now that's a very, very small amount, but what it does is it prevents the middle of this interval having a note which we would recognise of 8 over 5 as a ratio relative to the beginning. And that ratio is found in the planet Venus, and it's a Fibonacci ratio. Venus is the most systematic of the planets in the solar system, and expresses the Fibonacci version of the golden mean. But if we add 81 over 80 to it, then we end up with the actual golden mean, and more like the irrational true ratio. And so it appears that the moon has got a change to 27 over 25 from having a semitone value. And so it appears to be that the moon, by having a large and massive moon close to the Earth, it changes the way the law of 7 works upon the Earth itself. And this may be some part of the hidden meaning in Beelzebub's presentation of Hanul Miatsnul in Beelzebub's tales. So, and then at the top here we find a ratio that should be 16 over 15 normally, but it is 256 over 243, and that happens to be exactly the ratio found between the eclipse year and the solar year. The eclipse year is the period of time between which eclipses can occur, but the solar year is nothing, is nothing not related to eclipses. It's to do with the sun going round completely in the seasons and the year. And so it appears that we have two candidates for these semitones or stopindas, the third and the seventh, that are actually cosmically relevant and hence tie some element of the cosmic systematics to what is a sevenfold structure associated with transformation by John Bennett. And the Hanul Miatsnul is brought out as the problem of the fifth stopinda, and in this there is a danger or a problem of incompatibility. Sometimes it's expressed as being a kind of ego problem, or an insincerity problem, or some extra effort of harmonization rather than another type of effort has to be made according to the description of it. And in that Hanul Miatsnul, Venus appears to have been the note there has been displaced up to the actual near irrational golden mean value. Now this is very interesting because a lot of people think that the golden mean is very important for life and the growth of natural things. It displays itself characteristically in the number 5 and in phi, the golden mean. So when I was writing the book which had this information of how megalithic people had knew about these ratios, it seemed to me likely that some kind of teaching had arisen to do with what the moon was doing to the Earth. And this would mean that Hanul Miatsnul and all these characteristics of Heptaparaparshinock are the results of living on a planet with a large moon. And a planet with a large moon is, Gurdjieff says, Beelzebub came from such a planet himself. He says that your favourites live on a planet such as this, that it causes similarities to the already arisen to arise, which we would call life reflecting the cosmos. And he also says that our hasnamas, those that have gone into egoistic evil but have developed themselves as such, that they go to disharmonized planets where the moons are deliberately disharmonized. And so this raises the whole problem of our predicament in the biosphere, that that we have this challenge on our planet of avoiding disharmonization, egoism, and doing something to, at this point, something extra, and being worthy to have the process end completely on its own. And I chose to describe this 81/80 as being the subjective action that he talks about. The subjective action being, in this case, something more that we have to put in to make the food come into the process, which will revivify what's in a sense only theoretical up to this point. That is a subjective action that we have to make to master our egoism, or give ourselves properly to the process. And then, having done that, there's no subjective action required for the final stopinder, that it will complete, as he describes it, according to all the accumulated intention of the process up to that point.